I thought, what's the worst that could happen? And then the worst did happen. It was almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way.
Hello, I am Kay Anderson, and you are listening to Lost Spaces, the podcast that mourns the death of queer nightlife. Every episode, I talk to a different person about a venue from their past, the memories that they created there, and the people that they used to know. Now, I got an email from this week's guest saying that he would like to be on the show, and the way he pitched himself to me was, I know that you like talking about sex, so I think you'll be really interested in my stories. And let me tell you, I felt very judged and a smidgen shamed, but also, yes, I am very interested in hearing your stories. And so that is how Dave Quantic came on to tell me all about the LA Lost Spaces, Spike, and Cuffs. And when it comes to sex, he knows what he is talking about, believe you me. Dave is the creator of Fruitbowl, an oral history podcast about queer sex and sexuality, where every episode he talks to a different person about their journey and their experiences with their queerness. We chat all about the magic of a scuzzy dive bar, the pains of removing body hair in order to try and fit in, and Dave helps me to try and figure out what my kink should be. I'm still not quite there, but I think I've got some options.
I moved there for film school in 1999. I went to UCLA Master's Film School, MFA, and I left in 2016.
1999.
Yeah.
What a magical year.
It was.
No, I'm sorry. Every time I say anything, I sound like I'm being sarcastic. I'm not being sarcastic. Like, it was a magical year.
It was. I mean, it changed my life. I was living in New York City at the beginning of the year, and I was living in LA at the end of the year.
Wow.
So I moved from New York to LA by driving cross country and staying at my parents' house in the summer in Wichita, Kansas. So
Wow.
it was a year of transformation.
And so what, like, other than the obvious, going to UCLA, why did you want to move to LA?
I wanted to become a filmmaker, and that's where people make films.
And can you tell me a little bit about how, before you got there, how were you imagining LA would be?
That's such a cool question because LA definitely has a place in my childhood's fantasy. Growing up in Kansas, which is definitely not California, there was always this mythology.
And side note, whenever anyone meets you, do they expect you to know who Dorothy Gale is and be best friends with her?
Yes, there's always
Does
the
that
Wizard
always
of
come
Oz.
up? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Sorry. Back to what you were saying.
I love Wizard of Oz, by the way. I'm a gay man, so
yeah, of
I love
course.
talking
But
about
I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, right?
it is. But the Kansas is very proud of their Wizard of Oz history.
Really? So is your school uniform ruby slippers and a gingham dress?
I wish. That would have been amazing. That would have been amazing. I've never done Dorothy drag. I should now that I think about it.
Okay, well, as soon as we get off this call, I'm going to expect you to go out and get a costume and send me a photo.
Yes.
But anyway, sorry, we were talking about your imagination and what LA meant to you.
Yeah, so growing up as a little gay boy in Kansas, I was, force-fed the sort of mythology of California and Los Angeles through different TV shows like Chips and
what is Chips? Is it
Chips is a
cops thing?
Yes, Chips is a cheesy cop show from the 80s with this very hot male, police
Okay.
partnership. One is a very hot Latino guy, and the other is this sort of like golden boy California dude. And they go around solving, mysteries and on their motorcycles, dressed, in full police regalia. It's very uniform oriented. I do have a uniform fetish. I'm openly admitting to my uniform fetish.
And this is where it was born.
Mm-hmm. What other? Melrose Place, 90210.
Oh, 90210. Saved by the Bell.
I wasn't much a Saved by the Bell fan. What were the other? Well, there was this fashion company in the 80s called Ocean Pacific, and they had a lot of print T-shirts that sort of had a lot of iconography of California with palm trees and setting suns and mountain ranges and surfer boys. There was that whole kind of surf culture that I was obsessed with and wanted so much to just be on the beach, which is ironic because when I finally did move to LA, I think in the 17 years I lived there, I went to the beach maybe 20 times. I'm not much a beach person, I discovered. But so definitely California and LA had a sort of mythology about it that I wanted very much to be a part of.
And then, so getting there and being there in the first few months, did it live up to the hype?
It did. I mean,
it did. Good.
Yeah. I had just lived in New York where people are a little bit more bundled up,
It's cold.
It's cold, but also in New York, there's sort of this black uniform people wear. There's this sort of like anti-fashion in a sense that you're sort of meant to be sort of very chic and low profile. Whereas in LA, everything was just all out for everyone to see all the time. And people had their clothes off, and some of the most gorgeous people in the world all moved there. So it's, of course, very intimidating. It's a feast for the eyes and the senses, and the way it smells and the weather, of course, is amazing. It's a magical place.
Well, I mean,
I do miss it.
This was going to be my follow-up, was about this feeling intimidated. Like, if I'm around a bunch of beautiful people, I'm like, well, fuck, I may as well not exist.
It is intimidating. I agree. I had a lot of insecurities about my body. This was in the days before bears were like a thing, before people started to really embrace sort of alternate body types. I mean, as I lived there, people started to really sort of loosen up with regards to different body types and celebrating body hair and, bulkiness. So it was kind of interesting. I saw the culture change even while I was living there.
So, and we're just going off on a side note. Do you identify as a bear?
By default, I like bears, and people think I am a bear, so I guess I am a bear. I'm okay with being a bear.
But does that mean you're a bear?
I mean, in the same way that, like, I think somebody who's traditionally beautiful, whether or not they want to be objectified because of that, they don't really have a say in it,
But you could,
I don't know.
But you could reject that label and be like, no, actually, I'm a porcupine.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't feel a lot of necessity in that. I embrace it. I think it's fine. I think it's kind of cute.
A bear necessity?
Bear necessity. Yes, exactly.
The whole thing is interesting.
I mean, who doesn't like bears? Bears are cute.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that bear culture is exciting, but it's this kind of thing that, like, you also don't want to be told you're something.
Sure. And also, like, I'll admit to being a little bit exhausted when people take the whole thing a little too seriously,
Like when they growl at you.
Yeah, or like...
when they steal your picnic basket.
Or if, like, they're all in with the whole tattoo thing. I don't know. Sometimes people can go a little
What
overboard.
do you mean? Like when they get the paw.
Or they actually have like bear paw tattoos. I'm just like, pump the brakes a little. It's not,
And also, do you need your own flag?
I really don't care. Oh my God, the whole conversation around flags is exhausting.
I just wish we got an update every time there was a new one.
Oh God.
Bears. Oh, so this is something that you don't have to comment on. I just need to say it because I've been thinking it recently and I haven't had anyone to talk to about it. But you know, when you get to a certain age and suddenly you're too old to go to certain clubs, what I've noticed is that most gay men just disappear, except for the bears who continue to go out and have their own nights.
That is so true.
But all the
I
other
love
gay
that.
men just like are off the map or at home.
The bears love a good beer blast.
It's so weird. Like,
I think it's cute.
Why isn't there like a twunk scene or...
There's not a lot of older twunks.
Well, there's
being a
tons of
twink or-
twunks.
Yeah,
But where are they?
that's a really good point. I don't know.
Yeah, okay. As I said, you don't have to have an opinion.
I mean, I'm personally looking forward to going out. I love going out. That's why I love your podcast, is because I like to hear about what people do when they go out and they have a good
In
time.
days of yore.
Yeah.
So bears. No, but that's not what we were talking about. We were talking about LA. We were talking about coming to LA. And so
Yeah.
at this point in 1999, who were you? Were you out? Were you
Yes.
flaming? Were you practicing?
I came out when I was 18, my first year of undergraduate school, and I never went back in. I've been out for 30 years now. I'm 48. Wait, 30 years. And I was very much recruited for the UCLA film program because I was queer.
I thought you were going to say you were recruited by the gays. No, so you were recruited because how come?
UCLA is very committed to diversity and giving minority groups the education and the empowerment of film in telling their stories. And when I interviewed for them, I was very much about, I want to come and I want to make queer film. Queer film at the time was having a huge renaissance in the late 90s. It was a very, very exciting time. Todd Haynes,
Greg Araki, other
of course,
people.
other people.
Todd Solondz.
Todd Solondz. I mean, exactly. I actually saw him in New York when I lived there.
He's wonderful.
So, I mean, Todd Haynes was my main hero, and he remains my hero to this day. I think he's extraordinary, and he made me want to be a filmmaker. So I came in to the program ready to talk about queer stories, and I definitely did that. I've done that for the bulk of my film career. I've always made queer film.
And today we're here to talk about your stories.
Yeah, I know. It's exciting.
So where should we start? Should we start at Spike or should we start at Cuffs?
Let's start at Spike because it's a little darker story, and it happened earlier in my attendance in LA gay bars.
So let's position ourselves.
Yeah.
What year are we, or like what period are we around? Is this after you've just moved to LA? Is it later on?
It's a few years after I've moved there in the early aughts, 2002, 2003.
Oh, good years, vintage years.
Still feels like yesterday, of course.
Oh, God, yeah.
And at the time, I was a bit adrift when it came to dating and sort of finding a queer support network. I hadn't yet really found that group. I had an amazing friend group at film school, but I still hadn't yet found my sort of queer network.
And what was your feeling about that?
I was very lonely. I wanted very much to be in a relationship. I thought that's something I needed to do. And yeah.
So it was less about having a circle of friends and more about the validation of being in a relationship.
I think it was a little of both. I just needed more queer people around me. And I was sometimes I say that I didn't actually start living in LA until I graduated from film school because the program was so immersive and it was so stressful. And I needed so much to blow off steam while I was in it. And I didn't have many outlets to do that with. It was pretty much filmmaking all the time. I could have just lived at film school and just been okay with that because all I did was drive to school and then drive home, sleep, and then drive back to school. It was a very, very intensive program.
How did you stay inspired?
Well, I mean, I loved all of my classes and making film. It was what I'd always wanted to do, but I think it came at a cost of not really developing a network or friends outside of the program. So,
and you said that you wanted to make queer films. You were recruited on that basis. Was that not giving you the exposure to queer people?
It was, but not in the way that I wanted it to. I actually, now thinking back, like I started to meet the people who became my queer network around that time. But at the time, we were just sort of casual friends, or we were sort of starting to figure out what our relationship would be to each other, you know? That awkward time when you meet queer people, you're like, okay, am I going to date you or am I going to be best friends with you, you know?
Yeah, and sometimes you completely squeeze any possibility out of that relationship because you're like, oh my God, you're one of me. I need you in my life. And then you scare them away.
Yes.
Which, is obviously not something I'm saying from experience.
But I think as young queer people, there is a sort of a neediness built in where you're like, okay, I need my support network and I need them now, and you go to great lengths to try to find that. And it does result.
That's the thing. You compartmentalize your sexuality when you're in school or when you're not around people with the understanding for yourself that as soon as you get out of school, you're going to have the opportunity, you're going to do it. And then when it doesn't materialize immediately, you're like, oh, well, this sucks.
So I was very lonely in a lot of ways back then. And I was living alone in my own apartment, so that didn't help. I didn't have a roommate at the time.
That sounds amazing.
Well, I'm just kind of like giving a context. I'm glad you asked sort of what the background was because it definitely does play into the tale that I'm going to spin. So maybe I should just tell you what happened.
Yeah, let's go.
So I was living in Beverlywood at the time, which is more towards the center of LA. It's not on the east side or the west side near the ocean. It's sort of in the middle. And so it was really easy for me to sort of access West Hollywood, which if you don't know, West Hollywood in LA is sort of like the tourist trap. It's like everyone's idea of what LA gay life is going to be, in that it has like a lot of clubs, a lot of big clubs, the Abbey, Rage, Mickey's. Those were the big three at the time. And that's where you went to party. And so it was pretty easy for me to get there. And also around that same area were after hours clubs where you would go after those big clubs closed down at 2. And the Spike was definitely more of an after hours place where you would go if you didn't want the night to end. But yeah, the Spike was the definition of a dive bar. And I'm not sure if you know what I mean when I say dive bar.
I think I do.
I mean?
People say this term a lot, and I've just kind of been like, oh, yeah, okay, I get it. And I think it's like rundown, very no frills, very craptastic.
Yes. Definitely there's no attention paid to interior decor. It's all like black walls, very low lighting, no like fancy cocktails to be had, no theme of any kind except for the occasional like cutout plywood model of a Tom of Finland character, like you always see those in dive bars. Definitely has like a regular crowd with a bartender that's been there for decades. Leather, kink friendly, maybe a dyke or two, for good measure.
And sticky carpets.
Sticky floors. Maybe a drag queen that's just come off of her, performance at a big club. But kind of a place for people who maybe don't fit in at the more mainstream clubs. Like you don't have to dress up. Jeans are the regular sort of outfit, which made the spike much more of my scene because I didn't have to really kind of adhere to the beauty standard, because I am a hairy man and I don't manscape at all.
Yeah, because I mean, who's got time for that? But so
Well, a lot of people.
Well, yeah, apparently. I just
Yeah.
don't understand why people would go to an appointment and like give up their time to get their hair ripped off their body.
No, I did that though in the late 90s.
Oh, really?
Oh God, yeah. When I lived in New York, I actually got waxed a few times. It was very painful, and I never wanted to do it again.
Was it painful, good, painful, or painful, bad, painful?
Bad, painful.
I
With,
feel
like-
like I should try it. I just
No,
never have. I've like veted bits of my body hair and shaved, but I've never waxed. I feel like
Yeah.
I should.
No, don't.
Like, did you get your ball sack done?
No.
Oh, okay.
That was a bridge too far. I was
Because
like,
that would be really interesting.
stay away from that area.
It would be super interesting, the sensation.
Hmm.
So tell me about it.
Yeah, there was the kind of, I think I wanted it to be a more welcoming place than it actually was. And when I would go there, it would always be after hours, after 2 a.m. And I would always be, drunk, or at least not in my full mental capacity. And the night that I am thinking of to tell you about was one where I started talking to these two guys who were very attractive. And, as a sort of a lonely, insecure gay boy, I was like kind of excited that they brought me into their group. And we were, I think, drinking, even though it was after hours. I think Spike would sometimes still serve illegally. I think they even let people smoke inside back then, illegally as well. So it was a very permissive sort of atmosphere, and at one point they proposed smoking meth. And I took them up on it like an idiot.
Just in the bar.
In the bar, like with a glass pipe and everything. It could not have been more obvious what we were doing. And, I am not a drug user by nature. It's something that I do once in a while with friends, but this was definitely a risk that I took. And
so had you done meth before?
no, and I haven't done it since. It was a terrible, terrible experience.
I'm really like, I know meth is bad, but
Yeah.
that's all I know. So what happens? Is meth
Well,
the
this
one
is-
you have when you're like going to a sex party? Okay.
So you kind of know where this story is going.
Okay. But not the symptoms. What happens?
What it does is it like lowers your inhibitions to the level of which you just don't care about anything. And it really amps up your sensory sort of sexual hunger.
Okay.
You become kind of like a sex fiend, or at least I did. And I knew this going into it and thought, well, we'll just see what happens. And, I literally just took one hit of it and I was off to the races. It just became this night of debauchery in the most extreme way with people I had no idea who they were. I'd never met them before. And by the way, after this night, I never ever saw them again. It was almost like they appeared in a fever dream and they were just there to sort of allow me to go to the extreme. And it was really scary in that I ended up taking both of them back to my place and I had sex with one of them, like for hours, not in a fun way, but in a sort of fevered, urgent way where we were really just trying to get off, but we couldn't, because that's another side effect of meth is that you just can't come. It was a nightmare. And by the way, we're completely unprotected.
Okay.
And I was not somebody who ever had unprotected sex. Maybe I'd done it once or twice and really gotten freaked out by it. So not only are your inhibitions lowered, but your sense of risk is completely obliterated when you're on meth. You just don't care.
Well, so that's really interesting because I know it's a really big problem in the gay community, and but I also I kind of assumed that it was enjoyable to be having sex on meth. But you're saying that it's not. It's like
it's like, I mean, I talk a lot about sex, because I have a podcast about it, and there is a release that you're searching for, which is, orgasm. That is really what the end goal is. And with meth, you can never, ever reach it. It's like heading to a city you're really excited about visiting and you never, ever get there. You're always on the perimeter.
But you're not like, wow, this is an amazing journey.
No, because you can't ever reach your destination. It's terrible.
Ah, that's interesting.
I mean, you realize when you're on it that you're like, yeah, this is kind of fun, and I am sort of like in the state of orgasm.
Yeah.
Like pre-orgasm where you're sort of extrasensory, but because you can never come, it ends up never really paying off, and you end up like staying up the entire night. People talk about having mental breaks because they haven't slept in days or whatever, and what happened after I had sex with this guy unprotected, like for some reason we decided to like go out driving in his car, and he like, I'll never forget, like in his convertible, just driving down the street. It was a really nice car. I think this guy had a lot of money. It was sort of like, oh my God, the sun's up and it's the next day and I still am partying. This is weird. There was no end to it. And then comes the emotional crash afterwards, which a lot of other people talk about, which is momentous depression and sadness because your brain has like used up all of its
serotonin.
Yeah. You just, if you're not prepared for it, you get really, really dark very fast. And the only good thing.
So what happened? So you went on this drive and then he dropped you off home and then that's when you came down?
Yes. And then I realized that he and his friend had stolen all of my cash out of my wallet.
Oh, fuck.
So like I'd been played in the most basic LA way. I felt like such an idiot because I didn't really see them for what they were. And then one of them had the audacity to call me the next day and like nothing had ever happened and asked me if I wanted to go out again. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, do you really think I'm that stupid that I don't know that you stole money from me? He's like, no, it was my friend. I swear it wasn't me. And he gave me all these excuses. I'm like, go fuck yourself. Like, I never want to see you again. And I didn't. I never saw those guys ever again.
So you didn't think like, oh yeah, I'm going to pretend that I'm cool with this and then show up and then shank him.
No, I was just like over it. But like the one thing good that came of this was that I think a few days later, I finally sought mental health resources at like a nonprofit in LA. I went and got myself some therapy. And then I ended up being with that same therapist for 15 years.
Wow. Wowzers.
So like something good did come of it in that it sort of brought me to the edge of my sort of limits in terms of how dark I wanted to go. And, after that day, I was like, okay, am I just going to become another LA tragedy? Like, is that really what I want from my LA experience? And the answer was no. So in a way, it kind of was the necessary extreme to force me to want to take another path. And I'm grateful in that sense that it gave me a moment of clarity.
Yeah. So can we just cycle back to a statement that you made earlier about you wanted that bar to be more welcoming?
Yeah.
Was this at the point where you felt like, oh, I don't have my people? And so were you running towards this situation?
I think so, yeah. I thought of it as being a moment of communal experience. I thought, what's the worst that could happen? And then the worst did happen.
Mm-hmm.
It was almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way.
And in those days afterwards, when you were down, what were you thinking about?
Well, I was really worried about HIV. This is pre-prep. I was so mad at myself for fucking this guy without a condom. And we both bottomed, you know, we were all up in each other's stuff, you know, and there was nothing we didn't do. It was like, again, endless. It sounds fun, but it was kind of a nightmare. It was a nightmare.
And so was your penis all chafed afterwards as well?
You know, it probably was. Yeah.
I know that's not the thing to be focusing on, but like our skin tones are quite similar. So I'm assuming you have sensitive skin like mine. And it's a real problem if you fuck too much.
Sure.
So the thoughts about the days afterwards. What made you make that call or make that inquiry or pluck up the courage? Because it requires so much courage to start seeing a therapist.
I had done a little bit of therapy in New York when I lived there and a little bit in undergrad when I was going to school in Dallas. And it did help. And I knew that if I sought out somebody who I could really count on and see for an extended amount of time, that would be a benefit and it would be something that would help me sort of survive that difficult time in my life in LA. LA is not the easiest place to live in. There's a lot of like comparing yourself to others, both physically and professionally and personally. You know, there's a lot of people who are very extroverted about how great they're doing, you know? So there's a lot of insecurity that's built up, at least it was for me. So having a therapist really helped me sort of talk through those difficult times and basically saved me from becoming a LA casualty. I love therapy. I highly recommend it to anyone, especially queer people who are in sort of a transition part of their lives. It's something that we can all really benefit from by looking at ourselves and trying to improve ourselves.
I really don't trust extroverts.
Yeah, I know. There's so many in LA that want so much to tell you how fabulous they are all the time. And it's just like, dial it down.
Yeah.
Dial it down.
There's a really interesting saying that I'm about to butcher. And it's something like, never trust someone who's charming. And I always remember that.
Yeah.
If someone's really nice and like gregarious, I'm like, no.
Yeah. I like the nerds. I like people who are shy. I like to pull them out of their shell. And I like people who are a little bit off of the mainstream. Going to Spike, actually, there was sort of that illusion that you were sort of like in the alternate scene of LA. So in that sense, it was a good space to be in because you didn't have a lot of the necessary elements that you had to adhere to in the other more mainstream spaces. So I kind of wanted it to be a safe space, and it ended up not being great because of that drug interaction, which is why I want to talk about the other dive bar in LA, just because I didn't want to give the impression that I thought all dive bars were drug dens, which they're not. I love a good dive bar. And the other one that I wanted to talk about was also sort of an after hours bar called Cuffs, which was on Hyperion Avenue in the very center of sort of the cool, more alternative part of LA called Silver Lake, which is much more my thing. I eventually moved closer to that neighborhood and definitely started to find my crowd, my support group, and Cuffs was kind of near a friend's place, so we would often go there after the bars. And again, it was very dark, very sleazy in a good way. But one of my favorite parts to it was that it definitely had the feeling that it had been there since the 70s or 80s. and it definitely was like sort of built for sex in that at the perimeter of sort of the large drinking space, there was a platform with a railing where people could go up onto the platform and sort of drink and look out over the main floor. And at some point I realized that the platform was exactly the right height so that if somebody below was standing, they would be face level with most people's crotches who were standing on the platform. So it was like the optimum height to get like a blowjob in the bar.
And so was it designed with that in mind, or was it a happy accident?
No, I think it was designed for that in mind, which I thought was really hilarious.
And so was it actually a sex venue, or?
It wasn't necessarily a sex space, but I think people would get blowjobs now and then, you know, which I love. I think it's really funny when guys get frisky in public, and you know, a blowjob is pretty low. I don't know. It's low profile. It can be done discreetly.
Can it?
Yeah. Especially if somebody's like up on a platform and their dick is just right there for you to like unzip. I never partook, but I'm sure other people did.
But like, how do you do that discreetly? So if you're like on the ground level and you've unzipped the package and it's like plopped out from the trousers or, you know, whatever the person's wearing.
Yeah.
How do you suck someone off without drawing attention to yourself?
Well, if it's really dark and really crowded, then you can do it without a lot of people looking at you. Yeah.
And what about when they get covered in some sticky substance?
Well, they're going to have to swallow, I guess. There's really not a choice.
Oh, I'm not sure about this.
Oh, and the other fun addition to this space was that there was always this one guy there who was kind of like a leather daddy, and he would always have like a wooden paddle with him with like holes bore into it, and people would call him the principal, and he would come around and he would slap people's asses with the wooden paddle. And he was always there. It was like his thing.
Oh, I love the people that are always there propping up the bar. Did you ever get paddled?
You know, I managed to never do it, but I pretty much all of my friends got paddled at some point because that was a sort of a rite of passage. Yeah. I loved him. I love, you know, people like that who are so into their kink that they just sort of do it all the time.
I don't understand how someone can be so into a kink that that's all they ever do. I'm like, don't you get bored?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that it's so they're on switch that that's all they need, you know? I wish I had that clarity. I really do. I wish I had that one thing.
That's a good point, actually. I wish there was that thing that pushed my button every single time, because then I'd just be like, yeah, I'm all in. And then, you know, you could justify investing lots of money in toys.
Yes.
Because I'm always like, oh, maybe I'm into this. And then I buy a toy or something, and then I never use it. And then it's like just under my bed, just in a bag, collecting dust.
Good point.
Yeah, I need to figure out what my kink is. I'm surely there's an online quiz for this.
Oh, yeah. I bet there is.
I wonder how scientific it is. Okay. Well, anyway, I will find out and I'll get back to you.
Yeah. Let us all know.
I hope it's something cheap.
Yeah. Leather does tend to really be expensive.
And also, you know, the dead animals, that's kind of a drawback as well.
Yeah, it's true.
And rubber. I know I don't put it on properly. But every time I put rubber on, like, it hurts to take off when you have body hair.
Right? And if you sweat in it, it's like...
And I just, like, I sweat when I'm just sitting, so... Yeah. Maybe it's like sitting on cakes or something. I've never tried it, but maybe it's fun.
The kink of sitting on cakes?
Yeah. Or balloons.
Oh... That's pretty cost effective too, so maybe you should try that.
I mean, the environmental impact isn't great, but
it's
cheap.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can compromise. Sorry, this is not the space for me to explore what my potential kinks could be.
But we knew the conversation would go there, didn't we? It always does with me. I have a way of bringing out these things in people.
Yeah, and to be honest, this entire podcast is just me wanting to find out what my kink is. So it's just years and years of research.
That's kind of why I wanted to be on your pod, is because I knew the conversation would go into
You could help me.
sexy. Yeah, I want to help you. I think everyone should discover their kink.
What if your kink is just like really boring?
Normcore, that can be hot.
What if your kink is like watching old episodes of EastEnders?
If it were, would that be yours? Maybe?
No, not really. I can't think of any TV show that would give me a stiffy.
One thing I've learned through my pod is by talking with people is that we are always in a constant state of evolution and change. Like what was fun yesterday might not be your thing today. And you might be interested in something tomorrow that you never ever thought that you would be into.
Unless you are the man at Cuffs who carries a paddle around and spanks people every day.
That's a good point. He definitely had his profile figured out.
He was in his lane. He was not getting out of that lane. So it took you off completely. You were talking about Cuffs. You were talking about your experiences at Cuffs. Thinking back to your life at that time, looking back on a young Dave, what do you think having access to those venues meant to you?
Definitely, they were spaces where I felt welcome, in that there wasn't a lot of emphasis placed on what you were wearing or what your body looked like. Because they were so dark, it sort of didn't matter. I really dislike pretentious spaces and people and food. Those kinds of things drive me crazy. I don't like when people are overly
snooty
and fancified, you know?
Oh, fancified. I like that word.
There's a certain relaxation to going into a dive bar because there's a very low bar, you know, for the people and the experience. And I think that kind of freedom makes you relax more, and it makes you be more of yourself, and you're more likely to meet people where they are and where you are. And there's a certain amount of clarity to that and a peace to that, because you can be yourself. You know, and I love dive bars for that reason alone.
Do you have any memories of Spike or Cuffs or clubbing from your own queer scene that you want to share? Well, if you do, I would love to hear from you. I want to create the biggest online record of people's memories and stories of queer clubbing. Go to lostspacespodcast.com and find the section Share a Lost Space and tell me all about what you got up to. You can also reach out to me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, where my handle across all platforms is Lost Spaces Pod. Find out more about the Fruitbowl Podcast by listening to it on your platform of choice, or visiting the website fruitbowlpodcast.com, or following Dave on Twitter or Instagram, and I will make sure that the links are included in the show notes for this program. Lost Spaces is not only a podcast, but a concept record as well. I have been writing songs about queer venues and the people who used to live their lives there, and will be releasing songs over the coming year. You can hear the first single, which is called Well Grown Boys, and is playing underneath my talking right this very second on all good streaming platforms. If you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate if you subscribed, left a review on your podcast platform, or just told people who you think might be interested in giving it a little listen too. I am Kay Anderson, and you have been listening to Lost Spaces.